in the interest of time, I will get going and open today's workshop. I'm really happy that you're all with us. We are here for the FT3 workshop on value of precision medicine, access and advocacy. It is the first of a planned series called Harnessing the Value of Innovative Health Technologies, Advocacy for Future-Proof Health Systems. As many of you know, FT3, or From Testing to Targeted Treatments, is a global multi-stakeholder collaborative program that aims to bring to life the potential of personalized healthcare and precision medicine and make it an accessible reality for all patients who could benefit from it. Overall, FT3 with its community operates across 3 goal areas. One on the system level and addressing issues or roadblocks that prevent access to innovative health technologies. The second one on at the point of care, looking at the activation of those innovative health technologies and their proper implementation. And the third one to get our hands dirty with the community and pilot existing tools and other approaches for local impact directly. Today, we are looking at the first goal area of FT3. Evidence-based precision medicine is accepted by decision makers. So this really revolves around the system level. And we have 3 projects that we're currently working on together with you and our other beautiful, wonderful collaborators of the community. One is the value of precision medicine, and under its umbrella, patient experience data in precision medicine. We are looking at the paradigm shift towards more comprehensive value-based care, and especially at holistic value assessment and the demonstration of impact of that value that innovative health technologies hope to achieve. In other words, we're trying to learn better what value means when we talk about biomarker testing, targeted therapy, and the likes. And we are looking into how we can leverage that newly gained knowledge and the various developments in the field to support decision makers and advocates to make the value case for innovative health technologies with the right evidence, such as patient experience data. On the other hand, the Precision Medicine Access and Advocacy project is much more on a practical level and looks at how can FT3 support precision medicine champions, so you, in your efforts to influence system change. And for that, we've been this year collaborating to create a comprehensive advocacy roadmap. This is supposed to address the unmet needs of advocates and help them better understand the accessibility conditions in their country, what type of readiness does the health system need to establish to make comprehensive access to innovative technologies possible, and what evidence can be collected and packaged so that decision makers could be convinced to change their approaches to access decision making. Now, combining these 3 projects, we are initiating today the FT3 Value of PM Access and Advocacy Workshop Series, which we have created for a common space to explore the various perspectives that exist, on the one hand on value and evidence, but also on advocacy, on how innovative health technologies can be better implemented in health systems, and thereby enhancing access to personalized healthcare and influencing system level change for better patient outcomes. Within our first workshop today, we have 2 concrete objectives. On the one hand, we want to synergize theory with practice, thinking about value assessments, value drivers, how can we communicate that, what evidence do we need to collect, is often almost an academic exercise. And we want to make the link to practice and advocacy and how we can use those insights to enact system level change. So for that, we hope to learn from you today, and hope we can give you something back as well to broaden our knowledge base and make that happen. On the other hand, we also want to directly inform advocacy pathways and opportunities and reflect collaboratively on how novel value drivers can be prepared, packaged, and advocated for towards uptake in health systems. Ultimately, we hope that these workshops and the ones to come will or can inform the various dialogues that you may be having with HTA bodies or other decision makers, and help you advocate for better access, drive communication strategies towards comprehensive value-based care. And of course, all the insights that we will be discussing today will directly inform the two FD3 projects, Value FPM, and within it also patient experience data in precision medicine, and the Access and Advocacy project. Having said that, today we will listen to a keynote presentation, have the opportunity as well to ask questions and get answers from Professor Lou Garrison on the importance of incorporating non-traditional value drivers in health systems. We will then have a look at the recent research that FD3 has conducted in collaboration with Trinity Life Sciences on the status of current innovative value assessment in selected HTA bodies. And equipped with that, with those insights, we will move into a co-creation activity together, where we will work on creating value arguments and the various pieces that are needed to comprehensively transmit the value of innovative therapies. And ultimately, of course, we'll have a quick key takeaway from each breakout group, and then I will talk about the next steps. So with this, I am Vincent. I am your moderator today. I work as a program manager at this Synergist and for FD3. Many of you know me, so I don't want to spend much time on talking about myself. We have Professor Lou Garrison from the University of Washington with us, who is also former president of ISPOR and the lead author of the ISPOR Value Flower, which will take center stage today. And my colleague, Lee Devay, who is a program director at the Synergist and FD3 and will present the research outcomes later in the meeting. With that, I will hand it over to you, Lou, and give you the floor.
Thanks so much, Vincent, and thanks for the introduction. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity, and I recognize several names on the list of people attending, so please follow up afterwards if you have comments. So I wanted to talk about the ISPOR Value Flower, Past and Future, and Valuing and Rewarding Innovation. Just in terms of my background, I did health policy research for about 12 years, teaching health economics in Poland in 1988. So that's been a while. And then in 1992, I joined Syntex in industry, which was I worked at Project Hope before that, and then worked in industry from 1992. So that's almost 32 years ago. But I left in 2004. I'd been head of health economics and pricing in Basel for Roche, and then I joined the University of Washington 20 years ago. So somewhat of a unique journey, but I've been dealing with these issues for a long time. One lesson is these things take time, and I think you all realize that. So the two things I'm really worried about are incentivizing innovation properly, so sending the right signals to innovators, both for medicines, diagnostics, devices, and so on. And then secondly, improving access to those innovations, which all of you are concerned with as well. And I think advocacy plays a great role in that. So let me begin with just some general background and then provide a bit of history about how thinking has evolved. We are not at the end of the game. It's not a matter of telling you we've got it all worked out and here it is. No, we're still debating how to deal with this and how to bring it into our thinking and moving access forward. So next slide, please, Vincent. For most audiences, you all probably know this, I like to remind people about just the nature of pharmaceuticals. Now, I will talk more broadly about HTA, but let's start with innovative pharmaceuticals, which get so much of the attention of HTA agencies around the world. And I think most people don't realize that we only produce 47 or average about 46 new molecular entities per year. It's a very complex marketplace with high risk, high reward. 9 out of 10 products fail in the pipeline. The information embedded in the product is a global public good, so everyone can benefit from that information in theory, though that's not what happens in practice. And there's not a hockey stick here. It's been pretty flat, but things have changed a lot over the last 10 years. We see now about over half of the products are for rare and orphan diseases, which really speaks to the nature of the science. I think there's an important science push in all of this. And things have changed over the last 20 years, I would say, in that regard. The science is just pretty amazing. And you all know there's pressures, obviously, on regulators to provide fast track access. So just want to bring that as a reminder. So we're doing 46 a year. Um, best estimate I've seen is globally we're spending about 200 billion a year on R&D. So if you think of it as a steady state, 200 billion divided by 50, it's probably costing at upper end 4 billion per product to get it to the market, counting the cost of all the failures. Now we can argue whether it's 2 billion to 4 billion, somewhere in that range, but it is substantial investments to bring the successful products to market. Next slide, please. So I think in about 2016, we decided there was in the US, there were a number of value frameworks that come out into the marketplace. And we formed a special task force of economists, both from the US and outside the US, people like Mike Drummond and Adrian Towles from outside the US. And really for me, this was the dream team. I had people like Patricia Danzin and Chuck Phelps and Darius Lakdawala on the team, and I co-led that with Peter Newman and Dick Wilkie. And we started out by saying what we're concerned about is sending signals to innovators. We want them to produce the right things, and we want to avoid producing things that cause harm. So we're trying. The key word for an economist is efficiency. We're trying to promote dynamic efficiency, which is the optimal rate of innovation. And we're concerned about the health of the population, but we're also concerned about the well-being of the population. And I think I'd say in the last 2 years, we see more emphasis on the well-being part. So ISPOR has embraced the concept of whole health, which aligns more with the Alma Ata definition from, I don't know, almost 40 or 50 years ago. So you're seeing more about that, but we're still focusing on health. But we formed a task force, and we had commentaries written by patient advocacy groups and other academics and so on. But so that went on. That was in about 2016. Our report came out in 2018, and we're still talking about it here 6 years later. And I'll say a bit about where there has been progress. But one thing, my career has taught me is things take time. They don't just happen overnight. So we've got to keep at it like you all are doing. So next slide, please, Vincent. Okay, I want to start with, well, how do economists think about value? Well, we think about value as what someone's willing to pay or what they have to give up to get at opportunity costs. Obviously, we all have different values. They vary over individuals, and they're hard. We can't use the market in the same way we do for automobiles, for example, because we're buying with insurance money. We're not paying with our own dollars out of pocket. But in theory, what I'm asking you is, if you wanted to have access to some a treatment 30 years from now, how much are you willing to pay in insurance premiums between now and then, or taxes to have that? So unfortunately, we can't really add that number as any given product is such a small percentage of that. We can't really ask that question. So we've constructed this whole methodology around the quality adjusted life here and calculations as a workaround, I would say. So let's move to that then, Vincent. So when we start out, we say, well, what we could start out, if I'm willing to pay, what should I be willing to pay for? Well, I should be willing to pay for any cost savings. I would be willing to pay for any life gains, life extension. I would be willing to pay for quality of life or morbidity reduction. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the cost per QALY and the sort of, we can talk about the bad reputation the QALY gets, but I think you would all say, well, that you value length of life gains and quality of life improvements. And that's all we're trying to do is approximate that. And we do it with cost utility. Now, I think what we came to realize that this is although this is useful and sends signals, there are other things that we want to consider, and that's what we'll be talking about, and you'll be debating today and discussing in your work groups. Next slide, please, Vincent. So one way to think about the QALY is area under the curve. We can think of on a scale where 0 is death and 1 is perfect health, a person progressing through life until they die. We get an intervention which can extend life, and that area under the curve is the QALY gain. You can see why it's conceptually appealing. Maybe there's we're going to talk about real option value, which is, we'll define that, but you can think of that as an add-on. But I also think what I'm not showing here in this diagram, I put a rectangle around this now that shows that there's the death comes before lifespan, which might be 90 years. So there's what we call a QALY shortfall. It's the length of life and quality of life you lose in the end of life if you don't make it to 90 or 100. Next slide, please. there's the box I wanted to show you, lifespan. So I was real pleased to see Ralph Riley. He's out here. I haven't, Ralph really was a key in motivating this EpiMed report. I guess we published this in about 2016, The Value of Knowing and Knowing the Value. And this was really motivated out of realizing that we weren't really dealing with uncertainty, and this connection between diagnostics and therapeutics deals with uncertainty. And you'll get a slide deck here, and I have a few slides that I'm hiding now, which basically talk about the history, my personal history with working at Roche on Herceptin. And Herceptin was in 2005. I was at a conference in Rome where they said, "Thank God for Herceptin and personalized medicine, or we wouldn't have anything to talk about." It was the poster child for personalized medicine. But as an economist, I was always concerned with how do I divide the value between the drug and the diagnostic, because personalized medicine was proceeding much more slowly than any of us. It's taken a while, and as you know, it's still taking a while. And so that motivated this, and we were looking into the value of knowing and how we would reward the diagnostic. But in doing that, we also realized there were a lot of other uncertainties that we need to deal with, and the other elements of the value flower deal with that, and we'll get into that. So this was the precursor to the ISPOR value flower. Next slide. Now, I mentioned that in the US, in the last 10 years, we suddenly had a number of value frameworks that had come out, and that motivated the task force. So we were trying to sort out all of those on the left from ASCO and ICER and other organizations. Excuse me. And what we came to realize was one of the confusing points is they were talking about different things. Some things we're talking about, do we bring things into the benefit package and how much do we pay for them, which is what I'm calling the plan level here. But once it's in the benefit package and you've decided it's worth paying for, you have to decide how to manage it. In the US, we call that utilization management, and we have step therapy and so on. And then some of the frameworks like ASCO were dealing with the shared decision making, where the physician was sitting with the patient and trying to reach a decision. And so their cost to society may be less of a factor. So the thing we're most, as economists and say as HTA agencies, we're really mostly at the plan level trying to say, well, should we include it in the benefit package and at what price? So you need to keep that in mind. And I call that decision context. And people are often confusing those things when they're talking about this, and people are thinking about different things. But I'm mostly focused on trying to figure out, well, how much we should pay to reward innovation. That's in the plan level. So next slide, please. I do want to mention that about the same time, there was an influential report that came out. This was a 20-year update from the U.S. Second Panel on Cost Effectiveness, and they produced the societal perspective. And we'll talk about the societal perspective versus the health sector perspective. And there are a lot of issues to work out there, because the societal perspective, as you can see, includes things like criminal justice, education, and so on. And certainly productivity is what we traditionally included, but we need to think about other things. Next slide, please. And I do want to point out that we have improved, and not anything our task force did, in terms of HTA, HTAI, and ISPOR came up with a better definition of health technology assessment. Now maybe you click. Well, maybe there's another thing there. Click on it if you would, Vincent. There. So it's a multidisciplinary process, and I won't read all of this, but they've really done a good job on the adjectives that describe this. We want equity, we want efficiency, and so on. And we're not just talking about medicines, though much of the focus is on innovative medicines, arguably because that may be the most in diagnostics and devices, the most innovative part of the whole healthcare sector. Next slide. Now, you know, industry, people working in industry know you're confronting a very complicated environment with countries on the left that are very quality based, like the UK and the US. Now we're not using the quality explicitly, but implicitly we have the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review that uses it and evaluate and recommending prices. In the middle, we have Australia and France, and on the right, the Germans have a different system that's focusing very much on clinical benefit and a negotiation process. So there's not just one way to do this, but I would argue they're all thinking about value that they're getting and in terms of the population they represent. Next slide, please. So this is came out of this is what came to be called the ISPOR value flower, and we happen to have 12 petals. And as I said, Ralph and I worked on the EpiMed, which value flower, which is the precursor. And I do want to point out this was not meant to be the definitive parsing of value. There was actually I was running a process along with Dick and Peter on a group process, a panel. Some people wanted adherence, somebody else wanted contagion. So don't assume that these aren't overlapping, that they've all been sorted out, but they're certainly important factors, and we'll want to discuss them. And the ones that say from three, from 4 o'clock through 9 o'clock, those are the ones dealing with uncertainty, and the ones we'll want to concentrate on. But equity is up there. We didn't discuss equity so much, but I would say of all the things that have happened since that report, there's been a lot of work on equity coming out of Richard Cookson and folks at York. And we've published a bit on scientific spillovers, which is just what economists call externalities. And so everybody benefits from scientific progress and the knowledge, and it's very synergistic, to use a term you're all familiar with. And so you want to worry about that, but it's hard to value, but you want to think about it. But I will focus mostly on some of the uncertainty ones, and I'm going to run through these quickly if I can, Vincent, if that's all right. So I won't say a lot about QALYs and net costs. Those are what we call conventional CEA or traditional CEA. Next slide, please. Now, historically, when we brought in the societal perspective, we really focused on productivity. What is it? How much, when you have to go, when you're off, miss work, and when we lose the output that you would produce, when you have to go to the doctor, we lose that. So when people have traditionally said they're taking the societal productivity, they really focus on productivity. But I think, again, that when we think more broadly, we see there are other things than that. But then the thing that was missed was really uncertainty. And I'm going to focus on those petals real fast, Vincent. So yeah, so real option value is the idea that if you get treated in an area where there's rapid technological change, like my wife has CLL, and in the course of her CLL, she's been able to move from a monoclonal antibody to a first generation, I think it's BTK inhibitor, to second generation. So it benefited from that life extension to get new things. The value of hope, is basically the idea that if there's a chance for a cure, you'd be willing to pay more for it. And it's probably a poor label because hope sounds like all of this is hope. But actually, technically, we're thinking of it like immunotherapy, where there's a fat tail in the survival distribution. The one I think is really important is insurance value. I mean, I say important in the sense that I think underappreciated. There's certainly the financial risk protection. If I bring it into the health benefit package, you're protected financially. I think the one that's really important is health risk protection, and then the interaction with severity and rarity. So there's a reason that we're willing to make adjustments in places like the UK for rare catastrophic conditions. And I would just say we all got peace of mind, this health risk protection, from knowing that we could do something about COVID after we actually had the mRNA vaccines. So that's extremely valuable. And this really leads to an adjustment in the threshold. So we don't have a constant threshold of 20,000 pounds per, in the UK, even though they do adjust that. So in the US, it could be much higher. And that's what we're trying to figure out, how much should we adjust the threshold. Now, I would say, let's go to the next slide. Fear of contagion overlaps with fear of contagion overlaps with insurance value. The reduction in uncertainty is really the value of knowing. It's the value I would get from having a test, and I have a better idea that that a woman's going to benefit from Herceptin. So I've already talked about those. So let's move on, Vincent. And then I mentioned these two again. I won't say any more about equity and spillovers, but they're operating at a societal level. So the question, it raises a difficult question. How much more should I reward Moderna or Pfizer for the vaccine because they've done something about health equity? Or in the case of sickle cell disease, how much should I have a premium for that? And that's we haven't worked that out. And that's why you're having these discussions. So next slide, please. So in the U.S., the two of our members of the task force, Darius Lakdawala and Chuck Phelps, have really formalized an analysis. It's called Generalized Risk-Adjusted and Cost-Effectiveness Analysis. They have a book on it now, and I can recommend it. It basically says, as I say down to the left, that it is, it basically can make the case that cost-effectiveness thresholds should vary, and we might pay more for rare catastrophic diseases. So we need to keep that in mind. And and I want to move next slide to. So what is the cutting edge of what we're talking about? And the cutting edge has to do with the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., which is, for one thing, we recognize when we create the nature of drug development is we generate what's economists call consumer surplus, which is the consumer surplus is sort of what you'd be willing to pay for something, but if you have to pay less, then you get the surplus. Well, during the nature of drug development is the surplus during before loss of expiry patent goes to the manufacturer. But after the manufacturer, goes to society. So you can think of something like atorvastatin, which was on patent from 1998 to 2011, and still a very highly used product for hypercholesterolemia. Most of the surplus is going to society. So we're arguing about in economics, well, how much of the surplus do I need to give to the manufacturer to incentivize innovation? And that's the big debate in the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. If we cut spending by $10 billion, how many of those new molecular entities, those 46, do we lose? Next slide. So, I had a slide in there. Okay, there's a slide there. I would just point this out to you. There's a group an organization in the US called No Patient Left Behind, you may be familiar with. And Peter Kolchinsky has that up. And he basically, this is a work that's been done on adjusting the threshold and how you would adjust it. And basically it does change things. So that's available on the internet. If you write to me, I can send it to you if you can't find it. But I would recommend taking a look at that. And then it is poor. Next slide. We're starting a special interest group on access, because it's not just value. It's also the big problem is we know that once we've invented these medicines, the marginal cost of making them can be very low. And so why does it take so long for them to diffuse? And obviously there are incentives for payers to want to drag their feet. They have limited budgets, and at the same time manufacturers aren't going to make a lot of money in some of these countries. So the tragedy is, it takes many, many years for oncology medicine to be available, say in Eastern Europe, that are beneficial. So we have a special interest group on ISPOR trying to do more analysis and try to promote things around that, activity around that. And my last slide, I think, I'm trying to promote one more. Yeah, I'm trying to promote this special interest group. It's what I call, as an economist, efficient HTA. Some people have another name like non-duplicative, but basically we understand that there's going to be some quote unquote free riding. The biology travels across borders, but we really want to speed it up, and we don't want to slow it down by complicated HTA processes where we know the products work. So we kind of want to move to more what I would say the model we see in China. You identify the products that work, and then you try to negotiate prices with the companies and try to speed that up. And that's what I'm calling efficient HTA. And the advocacy groups can play a big role in helping to push in some of these countries. So that's the end of my presentation, and happy to have a few questions if we have time. Vincent, I may have run over too much. I'm sorry about that.
No worries, Lou. It was super insightful, and thank you so much for sharing and contributing to this event with us. I'm really impressed. Really like how you make the link between value and assessing the value with access directly. So I'm happy to have some questions for you. Please feel free to just raise your hands, and if you're fast enough, you'll get selected to ask a question.
Or in the chat box too, if you want. That's good. Yeah,
absolutely.
I was pleased to see Ralph here. Ralph Rowley was one of the instigators of the EpiMed report. So nice to see you, Ralph, after all this time. Yeah.
Lou, you too. And thanks for, you almost called me out because I was just about to ask a question, but it's a comment slash question. I think it's related to the notion about a biomarker and a selected treatment. I think the utility is already defined there. So it's really some of the questions that we're asking are, some of these biomarkers are offered in panels of tens or hundreds of markers, and there's resistance from payers to actually acknowledge that there's value in the rest of that information. So curious to hear sort of your perspective on that pushback from payers that says, large panels, no, small individual biomarkers, yes. Does that represent a movement, or is that just the payer or health technology assessment folks retrenching and holding the line?
That's a great question. Actually, we had a session on that at ISPOR. And I'm not saying we resolved anything. I mean, fundamentally, we have the combination problem if we combine a test and something else that creates value. But also, there's value from ruling out things, right? And that's in the panel. So just and I guess what we found was we had a payer on the panel who said, our first reaction is none. He used a slide from Monty Python. None shall pass. We're not going to pay for things, okay, unless you can give me a good case. And so they don't want to pay for things that on the surface are not actionable from a medical intervention, but actually they're valuable to the patient to know they don't have the problem, right? Even if there's no treatment. So that they're going, but by being resistant and to push back, they're basically not willing to pay for things that are just good, that are beneficial to the patient. So I think that's where we left the discussion, and I hope that speaks to what you're saying, that those other elements in the panel are useful to the patient and their peace of mind, and that are not maybe actionable in the short term. So, but it's an unresolved area, and I think what he was saying in the U.S., the speaker from the diagnostics into PBM actually was saying, well, our first reaction is to push back.
Right.
We're only going to pay for things that are actionable. So I would say that that's true. That's a market failure. That's a flaw in this current system, because those things are valuable to patients.
And just one comment related to the term actionability. That's a place where we've been trying to understand, and I think this relates to behaviors, is that there's a different perception about what actionability means. And if you talk to a treating clinician, they're trained from the very beginning that if a test does not change your decision making about what your treatment plan is, then don't order the test, right? So, but all this other information could, in fact, and I think the evidence needs to suggest that there's a relationship between not just the one biomarker, but the whole of the biomarkers, and how that changes the perspective about how the patient gets treated, but also the patient's perspective about their treatment path. As well, and how engaged they are. So there's opportunity, I think, to address the definition of actionability.
You're bringing up something really interesting, Ralph, and I think it resonates with Deb's question in the chat. And she asks, how do we, as from the patient community, help payers understand and work with us? Deb, I don't know if you want to put in words what you have written beforehand to make sure that the question is understandable.
Well, so I'm Deb Collier with Patient Advocates in Research for the Payer Network. And we've been working a lot with research and precision medicine and biomarkers. There is a push from the patient communities to talk about NGS testing and how can we get full testing for patients, because it's still a major issue. And of course, with lung cancer and some other cancers, it can mean the difference between life and death. We're also finding that a lot of people who have not had genetic testing have some issues there that actually can complicate the situation. And so the combinations do matter. And I guess my question is, it seems like there is an advantage not only to the patient communities. We have problems and confusion in the provider communities as well. And then the payer communities, as you said, who are, interested in, well, if it isn't broken, let's not fix it kind of thing, where they know about certain biomarkers, but not others. But science is advancing so quickly that we kind of need more and more information about the biomarkers and mutations, because that's where the treatments are going. So how do we start the dialogue, a meaningful, useful dialogue for all of us to be talking about these things and trying to make better policies and decisions?
Well, I don't know if that's for me or other people here might be better at it, but I certainly, you try to influence the physicians in the treatment pathways, and you try to make sure that the Medicare program is not blocking it, right? So you got to kind of lobby at the congressional level, as well as try to push the science with the clinicians, because the clinicians they want to do a good job with their patients. So if they can be convinced that this is useful information, then that's kind of a first step. But I don't know, other people here are also tied into that whole community. Maybe that's something for the workshop discussion, is how to get how to influence policy. But I think you have to influence both legislators and the clinician community.
Absolutely. Let's pick this up in the breakout, where we also have a question that relates quite well to that. I have two more questions that I will ask, and then we can move on. One is here in the chat around what your views are on reconsidering the standard discount rate.
Yeah, I think we are reconsidering it. It's in progress, and I'm happy, Amanda, if you write to me, I'm happy to send you some of the latest thinking on that. But I think there's more push to have a lower discount rate. Also, there's a better argument for having a different discount rate between benefits and costs, but it's a very technical issue and it's not fully resolved. But I think things are moving towards a different discount rate, and I can point you to some of that literature that has come out of the U.S. government also in the from economists.
I saw the thumbs up and the thank you now in the chat. Then finally, Lou, like a last question from the FT3 side, and a lot of this community here also today present has been involved in the Value of PM project and in the considerations as to how we can make a difference. Considering that there is an abundance of value dimensions, there is a lot of difficulty to measure them appropriately, collect the data, and make an efficient link with final access and pricing decisions. We were wondering what your perspective is on a set of global principles for value assessment that could, and whether that could effectively provide guidance for local decision makers on how to future-proof their national health systems towards access to innovative treatments and tests.
Well, I don't know that I have the grand answer for all of that. Again, the special interest group, I'm trying to push for access, in around the world, because I see in Kazakhstan, where I was in March, access is very limited and the drugs aren't reaching there. So my theory is let's get the advocacy organizations to put pressure on the government to actually provide access. And then, FPIA is doing some initiatives around trying to encourage industry to reach out to smaller markets. So that's where we're at. I'm a big believer in global differential pricing, and external reference pricing is a barrier to use, and so we really need to come up with a more logical price system, and everyone who can contribute around the world can contribute to some degree to research and development for medicines and devices and diagnostics. So I think we want to push some reforms there. In terms of what this group does, I think you want to become familiar with all these factors that influence things. I'm very big on arguing that yes, we want to pay for life extension, we want to pay for quality of life improvements, we also want to pay for reducing uncertainty and for innovation. And so we want to pay more for rare catastrophic conditions. The science is pushing us there now, and that's where we want to use that. And we do have all these scientific spillovers that we're all learning as a system. It's a learning system, and everyone benefiting from the science. So, I'd rather put more money into science, one way or the other is what I'm looking for. So I guess I want to advocate for access and then differential pricing.
Thank you so much, Lou. This was really great. I am now moving on to the presentation on the FT3 research, and we'll hand it over to Lida Wei.
Thank you, Vincent. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Lou Garrison, for this wonderful presentation. It's very insightful. And we have read your work with pleasure, but we also had the question as an FT3 community, like, okay, this is great theory, but what do we see back from this in practice? Can we find early adapters that are considering these non-traditional value drivers? What is the adoption level, basically? So we asked Trinity, a research company, to also help us identify this more at a practical level. And I'm glad to see also, I believe, Brian here with us from Trinity, who know this research inside out as a principal lead and may be able to answer any specific questions you may have about this piece of research. I will give you a high-level overview of what we have found, and then there is time for some questions. So if we go to the next slide, we asked the community if we would do such a research, where would we put a focus? We had chosen 5 value drivers, of which 4 are really coming from the value frame flower, as was just presented. And then it was also suggested to take a more broader perspective, looking at what extent the patient perspective is considered in decision-making, or patient experience data, and that could include all kinds of value drivers from equity to quality of life, value of knowing, etc. So this was our broad kind of framework before we went to the literature. We then also looked at 4 specific HTAs that were chosen with a different HTA archetype. So we had looked at Germany, we looked at Scotland, Sweden, and then we also considered later on the Australian HTA. So they're all kind of different. You can see that on this slide, but basically we looked at what can we find in terms of their guidance, in the literature, but also can we find concrete case examples of how they have assessed precision medicines and considered non-traditional value drivers. So on the next slide, I can present you a high-level overview of the results. So on the left, you see a table with the 4 HTAs and also the different value drivers. And we kind of simply mark them whether we have seen some level of uptake or considerations of these novel value drivers. And again, this is a very high-level overview. We can go into more depth. But overall, we see that we still have a long way to go to really expand the current value frameworks that are used by HTAs. We see most consideration of patient preference and patient experiences, which is a broad category. So overall, there is a consideration of this often more in a qualitative manner captured for contextual purposes. We see not that much uptake, but some uptake in the reduction of unnecessary treatment and equity, and then not at all for value of knowing and real option value. So there is still work to do to bring this forward, but we also see potentially some early adapters. I find it a bit risky to say good practices, but we will look into and dive into this further to see what we have found as examples for argumentation. So first we go to Scotland. Here, you may be familiar with a specific engagement program they have. It's called the Patient and Clinician Engagement Program PACE. It's an initiative where companies can request a PACE meeting after a drug was not recommended by its original assessment. And this meeting will provide further insights, qualitative insights that will complement the assessment and significantly can change decision-making, as you can see in the graph on the bottom right here, which was coming from an ESMO poster last year, where we have seen a change in acceptance after such a meeting. And in those meeting minutes, we have found also the consideration of different value drivers that brought forward this influence in decision-making. So I will go into 2 case examples from this PACE initiative. So we'll first go to an ALK positive treatment that was considered, and the PACE group was asked to review this, and they really brought forward the patient perspective and experience, highlighting different aspects such as convenience, also potentially reduced pressure on the system, quicker and sustained clinical benefits, maintaining daily activities, routine of working. So this relates also to value drivers as productivity, quality of life, etc. And also the psychological benefit of knowing was mentioned. So here you can see that in between the lines, those value drivers were considered and can change decision-making, and at least were brought forward by the patient and clinician community. If we go to the next example, it's also from Scotland. It's specifically for also a treatment in breast cancer. Here, even 3 non-traditional value elements were brought forward and considered. So the patient perspective, reduction in unnecessary treatment, and interestingly also equity. So we see here some examples of what was shared by the community, such as prolonged period of life, also returning to work, this productivity factor, and also a longer response delays the time to further chemotherapy. So this humanistic and economic benefit was highlighted as an argument. And then the equity piece was also interesting here because they looked at other countries and said okay, in other countries this is offered, and that was kind of an argument that was brought forward and considered. And then we go to Australia. It's a bit of a different case, but we find an interesting example related to gene testing. So it doesn't really quantify the value of reductions in uncertainty, but it does consider and acknowledge its importance. And we see here an example that testing could optimize the selection of appropriate targeted treatments, and also enabling therapy selection, and then the unnecessary part to it, as well as reduced need for rebiopsy. So again, here you can see really clear arguments that have been put forward for the incorporation of these value drivers in decision-making. So if we go to the next slide, to conclude, so overall we see some acknowledgement of these non-traditional value elements, but we don't see any formal or consistently way that they are captured. So either they are captured by a patient initiative or patient engagement initiative after a formal assessment, or to some extent they are considered for specific cases, especially the patient experiences and patient preferences. We don't see that much the real option value or a value of knowing back. And also one of the arguments or what was shared is that some of that is very difficult to measure. So the methods development is key there. And then the equity factor is something that's very topical. And then some HTAs also consider these disparities. But overall, there's still progress needed to move the field towards more holistic value assessments, especially also for precision medicines. So that's why we are here today with you to move from theory to what we see into practice, to kind of advocacy in argumentation and data that could support decision-making and adoption further. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Vincent. Happy to answer any questions you may have, or the researchers who are with us today can perhaps answer them as well. If you have anything to add, feel free to jump in.
Thanks a lot, Liudevai. I see Carmen has raised her hand, so please, Carmen, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Vincent, and thank you very much for sharing on this presentation. I think that it is very useful. Perhaps my question is, from your experience, how would you consider we can try to expand this kind of experience in emerging markets when you know HTAs not always are very well established, context barriers, so the factors and everything is a little challenging, but also different.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And I think the overall question is indeed, we see just like not that much adoption of this kind of holistic assessment in general. I think coming back to Deborah's question is indeed starting the dialogues to clarify HTA's positions on these non-traditional value drivers. So to have that dialogue conversation, what is important from a patient perspective. It's very difficult to lose point to change the world in one day and change value frameworks that have been out there for a long time. But I think enhancing understanding and perspectives is a first step. And then also what we are working on with FT3 is also to provide data or case examples or stories that can support that. So what are the consequences of not considering this? So that may be another direction from my perspective, but I'm happy to hear what others have to say.
Perhaps this was a fantastic question, and actually I wanted to ask the group something similar. I think it is related, and because having done this research and having heard also Lou's presentation, there seems to be difficulties with the methods, with evidence generation around the different value drivers. There's limited uptake in HTA, and there is there is an access decision making that cannot keep up with the science. So we would like to know from you what needs and opportunities for advocacy you see arising from the insights shared so far. And actually, this should work automatically, but it doesn't seem to be working. So perhaps we can keep this in mind and move with this thought into the breakouts, where we will co-create around several dimensions. One of them being developing value descriptions from the various stakeholder perspectives that we have here around the table, and in relation to these value flower components. Of course, there's always the option to add other value considerations and the interaction as well. In addition to that, we would also like to learn from you and hear from you what type of evidence requirements there are, and whether you are aware of good practices of implementing or collecting evidence for the various value drivers. And then finally, I'd like to understand better what your needs are and your potential solutions for packaging value stories and associated evidence to inform advocacy campaigns. We will break out in 3 groups. You will see them here. We have taken the freedom to bucket the various value drivers under specific themes: personal and family impact, encompassing value of hope, severity of disease, and real option value; the societal and community impact with equity, fear of contagion, scientific spillovers, and reduction of uncertainty or value of knowing; and the economic and productivity impact with productivity, insurance value, and adherence improving factors or reduction in unnecessary treatment. We will have those 4 questions on the right-hand side in each of the group maps that we will be utilizing. And my colleagues Lidewij, Sylvia, and myself will be there to help navigate the group map and answer the questions and have a constructive discussion all together. You will be able to select your own breakout group, the one that interests you the most.
Personal and family impacts. And Deborah and I already discussed like how can we like bring more the clinician perspective on board and the clinical trial people to ensure that the data that's collected is really also aligned with the evidence that's needed. And I think that we would like to have a discussion with you here today in this breakout group to look at 3 of the value drivers that were presented specifically that all relate more or less to personal and family impact. So the value of hope, severity of disease, and real option value. And just to really build that story together. So clarifying what are the key arguments and benefits from your perspective, from what you have seen, but then also to Deborah's question, what evidence is needed to support this information? What have you heard from HTAs of what is missing in terms of evidence? What questions do they have? And hopefully, if you know of any examples of evidence that either you have collected or others, or examples of where it was used for decision making, we would welcome them, because again, we only looked at 4 HTAs in our case examples. Perhaps there are more examples out there. And then lastly, we also like to hear your ideas. And I think it was also you, Deborah, posting that in the group chat, like, how do we start those dialogues with decision makers? What kind of ideas do you have on how we can do that? So this is how we will run this breakout room. We have a little bit of an exercise, like a group map, where each of you can add your personal thoughts to these questions, so that you all have an opportunity to share your thoughts. And then I suggest we have a bit of a group discussion of what you add, and you can take the questions one by one, or you can take the value drivers one by one, whatever works for you. So Isha will now be sharing the link in the group map, and perhaps we can also then share the screen with the group map. So I give you some time to go there and add your ideas to the group map. If you find it more easier just to speak up, feel free to just add your first share your first kind of thinking, and we can always add it to the group map later. So whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Thank you very much. Maybe I prefer to talk.
Sure.
Hello, everyone. And yes, it's a big question, precision medicine, especially for me, coming from a low and middle income country. I'm based in Marrakesh, Morocco. And yes, we are talking about value, and we are talking not only about cost, but about effectiveness, about equity, about knowledge, hope, and approval process, and everything. And in my region, we have a lot to do, starting by the patient, also engaging patient in the beginning of everything, because the patient sometimes is like a subject of care, not like a partner. And of course, we need more data. We know we need also more stories, more success story to support, because we have the story, we have the experience, we have the expertise, and we have to use it. And this is why I will say this, we need a movement, not only to talk about precision medicine, because everyone has his own definition. We have to define the value and the value of precision medicine, point of view of patients, of parents, because we have kids touched by cancer, by disease and severe disease. We have to use all this story and to create this movement to explain and to define what is the value of precision medicine. And also we have to train also patients, because sometimes we invite patients like saying a story, telling a story and talking about the disease, the treatment, the access, but not about the value of the story to be used to serve the community, the whole community. We have to train these patients, because they have some experience and they use the medicine, they experience it, the side effects, everything they experience. We have to use this story and this pain to improve the situation and the care condition for the whole community.
Thank you, Bahija, for sharing. Anyone who wants to add to that? I see we're trying to, you talked about we need to bring this, we need a movement, and we need really the success stories of patients. We also need to support them or train them to share their stories. So that's what we noted down. Is there anyone who likes to add to that? Feel free to comment.
I think that bringing together organizations who got gathering, for example, healthcare professionals, but also patient advocate groups that could work close together and make a better impact in that sense.
Yeah, so really a collaborative movement or collaborative initiative where you can bring the story together.
Yeah. If you want me to add something, just creating alliance, because alliance about organization can make a big difference. Now, I know that it's sometimes it's very difficult to bring people together to create something, but creating alliance will, of course, increase the voice of patient perspective about precision medicine.
Yes, thank you. So this is really how we are talking a bit more how we can bring this, or how we can package this to influence change, basically. So we are adding a few ideas here to the green area on the group map. I'm curious to hear as well, if you look at the specific value drivers, so the value of hope, the severity of disease, a real option value, if we would look at such a storyline, what are the key arguments that you would include? What makes it what are the key arguments or key benefits that would help developing such a story?
I'm sorry, which one? I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
So if you go to the top left one, we were just talking about how we can create like alliances, a movement, how we can use the stories out there. If we go a bit more to the content part, could you give key benefits or arguments for the value drivers that are listed that you think should be included in such a value story? So for example, for value of hope, we have like a couple of examples there in what it would bring to patients. For real option value also, there have been examples out of other disease areas where it was really having the option to transform lives in the future. Are there any for severity of disease? We know that NICE as an HTA in UK have recently adopted severity of disease into quality validation, and there may be different perspectives on whether this is helpful or not. So I'm happy to hear, like, what are your kind of thoughts or key arguments? Is it a difficult question to answer? There's no one here.
Yeah, hello.
In
This
the
is
UK, no?
hello.
Oh,
Hello. This is Justin Friedley. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Apologies, my voice is a little brash this morning. I think one of the challenges is the lack of standardization or the disparity in perhaps the diagnostics creates variability in the patient experience, and so it's very challenging to create a cohort of patient experiences that are aligned in trying to drive that value proposition. And I'll give you an example, and let's just say, let's just look at breast cancer. You may have a health system as an entity and a subset group of breast cancer patients. They may all receive entirely different diagnostics. From those diagnostics, it then drives either different therapies, different clinical trial enrollments, different experiences. And so until there is a standardization, I think creating the convergence of experience, the convergence of stories, and the convergence of advocacy is going to be quite difficult. And I see that in real time quite frequently across multiple disease states. And I'll share this as a contrasting example. And I always bring this up, that imagine a scenario where you have a cardiovascular group within a health system, and each of us on the call are different cardiologists, and the cardiovascular biomarkers, we each have a preference on which troponin we use. And patient presents themselves. You might perhaps prefer troponin I prefer troponin T. Another member of this team prefers troponin high sensitive. Each one of us may result in a different experience for that patient with the same patient presenting. One patient might be sent to the cath lab. One patient might be sent home. The same patient might actually remain in the ED for serial draws for the next 8 hours. That would never happen. You would never have a health system that would allow the variability of cardiac biomarkers in doing that. Yet with oncology-based NGS markers, you can walk into a health system and one patient might get a 5-gene test, one patient might get a 30-gene test, one patient might get whole exome, whole transcriptome testing. Why is that? Because we've enabled the ability to drive that variability. It creates different experiences for the patient. And I think it'll be very difficult to create the convergence of experience, the convergence of advocacy when there's that much disparity upstream in the care pathway. So.
Thank you, Justin. Very interesting, because you're actually highlighting the variety in potential directions, but also that comes with the personalization of kind of trying to find out what kind of test and treatment is best for whom, so having that kind of personalized angle, but that variety is also causing, you said, complexity to have like a complete holistic value story, as there's so much variety in what the patients also then perceive as their experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be absolutely correct. I mean, I contemplated much of this at the Precision Medicine World Conference in January in Santa Clara. And it's interesting that it doesn't matter which organization you speak to, everybody will maintain this position of precision medicine. And whether it's biopharma, diagnostics, the payers, it doesn't matter who it is. In reality, my contention would be is nobody by themselves can define precision medicine. It's only the harmonization of all of those entities together, but all of them predicate this on data. Well, if we know that there's this significant amount of disparity in diagnostics where we derive a huge amount of data, then what is the value of that data? I actually believe the data is compromised if you haven't standardized that methodology to determine who is a candidate for a selected therapy, who is a candidate for a clinical trial. If you have a subset of a population that's only receiving 5 gene panels or 30 gene panels, and then you have another subset that's receiving much larger panels, the value of that data is actually compromised. And that then impacts all of the other downstream processes. One of those being establishing advocacy, establishing, that patient insight and information, because we know upstream that there's huge disparities. So I would fully agree with you.
Thank you. Just to ask the question, because I think this is very challenging reality to deal with. But if you're saying like the data and the disparities in diagnostics is a problem, if we look at the question like what evidence is needed, and I think Deborah, you brought that up as well, like often we don't have the right kind of data to answer the questions that decision makers have. Is there any specific type of evidence or looking at this disparity that would help make those decisions? Or is it, I don't know if we have a solution for this kind of disparity issue, but I welcome thoughts of everyone on this topic and the evidence that you feel would be helpful.
Well, for example, we at Lung Cancer Europe every year creates a report, and the report is based on information data gathered from patients and their carers on different topics. Like one of them is the treatment pathway and the challenges and the priorities of a patient, and quality of life is also included in our reports. So maybe like using collaborative approach and using this kind of information, or the opportunity when this kind of data is collected, to have the feedback from different stakeholders in order to make this database as useful as possible for this purpose. Because our reports are used for policy making by different advocacy groups. But I'm not sure if this was used for HTA purposes, for policy in HTA.
Very interesting, thank you. So indeed, like having feedback from stakeholders, which could include HTA, on how useful the data is that it's been collected. And perhaps then to Justin's point, like, is there any difficulty with the disparities of the different biomarkers that people may get and their different kind of treatment pathways? And is that indeed the question and the difficulties that exist? I don't know, Deborah, you also mentioned that you also hear back a lot that the evidence, or that there are other questions that need to be answered. Are there any specific examples that you can share where you kind of heard that the evidence that was there was not sufficient for decision making?
Well, I think probably the best thing to do would be talk to groups like ICER in the US, because that often the panels that they have considering the value of newly approved drugs, for example, or treatments, they often don't have the information that they need because it wasn't collected in the research that was done. And I can't give you a specific example right now. I'm sure I could come up with one eventually, but I would think that actually it would be better to talk with them, because they would have some very specific examples in multiple diseases.
So there are different routes there to clarify what evidence is exactly needed. So as Evelina shared, like there are yearly reports done by Luce and perhaps also by other patient groups, like what is missing in the data collected, you know, how can it be used for decision making? Can we get more insights into that? But also then from clinical trial data from various disease areas, like what are the questions and lack of data that is perceived by HTAs.
Mm-hmm. And there are actually some patient groups, especially in rare diseases, that are putting together patient registries to help gather some additional data that is being taken into consideration in some groups like ICER, for example.
So that's interesting. Is there a specific example, or perhaps we could look into that, like examples of evidence from registries that have been taken into consideration? Would that be real world evidence?
A lot of it is real world evidence. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is, you know, when we start thinking about the data necessary, is, you know, where does this data exist? A lot of the silos and the barriers to create that synergy of the data is a huge challenge. You know, you think about the US health system market, you'll have some of the data that may exist within the EHR of the health system. Some of the data may exist within clinical trial subsets that are parsed out when that patient leaves that health system. And what happens is you get these fragmentation of data that doesn't give you the whole purview into that patient. The other thing that we have to think about too, and I think this was a huge reality that I talk about often, is that during COVID, you know, it became a much greater realization that patients exist in multiple disease states simultaneously. So when we think about the whole treatment of the patient, what happens is you might get this subset of data that exists within the oncology practice, and then a second subset that exists within the pulmonology group. And the challenge then remains is if we're going to collectively look at this entire subset of data for this patient holistically, do we have the tools necessary to create this harmonization of data? My contention is no, and that's a huge challenge, because if we continue to maintain the siloization of disease state, then we'll never get to that solve for treating the patient holistically, or what is the value proposition, and even the question that you pose, you know, what are the value drivers for the families, the personal, you know, aspects of the patient. If we limit it to a single disease state, then we're not solving for the true value driver.
I mean, regarding the existing research we have, for example, I am a member of a group on Facebook, a private one, called TFR, Treatment Free Remission. And the number of this group is 804 members, and it's a huge number talking about data we can use, because this members, they stopped treatment, targeted therapy after taking for 3 years or 4 years, that now they can't stop. And we can show data like this. For example, we can use also what we call digital groups, or you know, already available, and we have some data. 800, it's not something small, it's a huge number, and we can use this information to show that if we have the access to targeted therapy, for example, we can stop. One day we can stop, and this is the benefit of precision medicine.
Thank you. So really making use of digital health data.
Yes.
In specific groups. It's still like specific groups, as to Justin's point, harmonization in data may be challenging, but it would be a good potential direction, like the registries and the digital health data sources. I don't know, Katie, is there anything you would like to add? Or I don't see her anymore. Okay, I was just checking if she is here as well. So we have talked quite a bit about what we can bring how we can bring things to decision makers, the movement, and also the challenges in the data part in terms of the variety in biomarkers, the variety in siloed kind of disease data, which makes it complex, but we have also discussed a couple of examples that are out there from registries that data have been used, potentially from digital health groups that can be used as an direction. I don't know, is there anything specific that is standing out to you, or a key insight that you feel this is key from the discussion that we want to share plenary? Any key takeaway for you, or any kind of thing that you feel we should further discuss? Because I don't think we have time to go in more depth now, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts about, and we can bring that to the plenary also as some of the signs of so something that we want to share with the group. Nothing in particular? No? All right, well.
No, one thing I'll just add real quick. Sorry, I was looking at the different subset notes that were on the screen, and I just had to zoom in and read those, so apologies. I do think that there's an opportunity, not on this particular breakout, but for future ones, really starting to delve into the social determinants of health, or disparate populations. Again, talking about how do you establish a value driver when you've inherently limited the subset of the population. Example in the US, Hispanic women with cervical cancer in, Southwest US, African American men in prostate, the testing levels are beyond unacceptable. And so thinking about how do we infuse health equity and social determinants of health in our validation of the data to then drive the value drivers, as well as the, what is actionable, I think is a huge component. So thinking about how do you infuse SDOH metrics into the collection of data that ultimately substantiates the value driver, I think you could almost have just a selective breakout just on that alone. So just a last thought.
Thank you, Justin.
And also including things I actually put that into the notes. So I totally agree, Justin. And also like geographic location is very important, age, those kinds of equity factors, as well as cultures and ethnicities.
Yes, fully agree.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the discussion. We will get back to the main room where we will have a very brief recap from each group.
Maybe while we wait, should we have a very quick round of introductions so we all know who we are? Maybe I can start. So Silvia Bornengo, I'm Associate Program Director at the Synergist, and I work in the FT3 program. So happy to be in this discussion, and I will help a little bit with the facilitation during this time we have. Yonut, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sylvia. So my name is Yonut. I'm an Associate Program Manager at the Synergist, and I'll be helping with the logistics, sharing screen, taking some notes from your conversations, and helping with everything.
Thank you. Hannah?
Hi, so my name is Hannah Algren. I work at AstraZeneca as the Global Medical Lead for Diagnostics in Breast Cancer.
Thank you for being with us. Andrea?
Hi, everybody. Andrea Stevens. I work in the Precision Medicine Access team at Johnson & Johnson.
Thank you. Melanie?
Hi, Melanie Ridley. I work for the Center for Innovation and Value Research. We were formerly IVI, a nonprofit research organization focusing on HTA in the US.
Great. The next is Ralph.
Hi, Sylvia. Hi, everybody. Ralph Riley. I'm also at J&J. I wonder, Andrea, if we should maybe go into different breakouts. It's up to you.
Sure.
Do you
No, I
want-
don't mind. I can pop into a different one.
Oh, so can I. I mean, I wasn't suggesting that you have to go.
No, yeah, I'll do that. I'll go into a different one. I'm not.
You sure?
I could have done any of the three,
Mm.
so I'm not worried. As long as we regroup afterwards.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Ciao.
See you.
You.
Great. Then maybe we can go with Carmen.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Carmen Vargas, International Diagnostic Director in AstraZeneca. So nice to see everyone.
Yeah. So now we have two from AstraZeneca also here. So maybe. Is it better if we distribute ourselves across the different groups? So
Whatever you prefer. I think whatever, it's also okay. We're not too many, so I guess it's up to your preference. So feel free to do whatever you think is best. And maybe last but not least, we have Patil.
Hello, my name is Patil, and I'm a program manager at Colorectal Cancer Canada.
Nice to have you with us, Patil. Okay, so I think this is who we are for now. So maybe we can get started. As you can see in the group map here, and we can share the link. Actually,
Yeah.
Jonathan shared it already in the chat.
Exactly.
So you can click on the link and enter the map. You will be asked to add your email, but it should be pretty straightforward. So what we will be doing in the next 30, 40 minutes or so is to actually go through these 4 questions that will help us to go a little bit deeper into the this set of value drivers that we have bucketed as the societal and community impact. So what we would like to do with you is to go through these 4 questions and make sure that we can capture your insights. So you are welcome to go into the map and directly add yourself, your thoughts, so you can also just share it in the conversation or in the chat. So if that works for everyone, I can maybe go very quickly through the different questions. So for question number 1 in the left purple box, we have a question around, could you give a key benefit / argument for these value drivers? So we have 4 of them bucketed under this dimension of societal and community impact. So the idea is to make sure that we can maybe add different types of perspectives around the key benefits. The second question will be about what type of evidence is needed to support this value driver in HTA. So again, we would love to hear from you. The third question, the yellow one, is about, do you have example of evidence that you or others have collected on innovative value drivers and how it was used or considered for HTA decision making? And the final question is about how can this information be brought or presented to decision makers for advocating for value-based care. So these are the 4 questions, and if you're okay with it, I would like to leave you a little bit of a few minutes maybe of silence for you to like get your head around it and maybe start to add some thoughts. And then once I leave you a little bit of time, we can start having a bit of a discussion. So let me stop there and let you think a little bit.
Sylvia,
Unless
can
there
I
are
ask?
questions.
Yeah, can I ask
Mhm.
really quickly a question? This is the first time on this workshop. So are we discussing about companion diagnostic or diagnostic as a standalone? What added benefit they bring? Because they obviously need different evidence if it's linked to a treatment or a standalone.
I think what could be interesting is to maybe think about the different, knowing that it really depends. We could even try to specify and maybe add, information about both dimensions. I don't think we want to necessarily only limit it to one another, but I understand that maybe specifications on which ones we are talking about would be beneficial. So I would say that maybe we can add some insights into both, if that makes sense.
Sorry, Sylvia, did you say that we can include both perspectives?
Yes, and perhaps we can put in brackets or somehow which one do we mean with the comment, unless we want to agree as a group to only focus on one, and that I'm also happy to say that maybe for this specific one we focus only on one. Do you guys have a strong feeling about one or the other or both? I'm happy to be flexible.
No, I mean, I would tend to leave companion single biomarker, single treatment sort of out of the realm. That's just in my perspective, is sometimes you have biomarkers that exist in a broader panel, and that's where the coverage challenges come up. Is even though you have an approved biomarker, the testing to get to that biomarker might not be covered. So
yeah, I would agree with you, Ralph, because I don't think the companion diagnostic will have such an access. It's more like show the added value of a diagnostic test that doesn't necessarily directly translate to a treatment.
Right.
That's usually the biggest obstacle. How do you show that value?
Right.
Okay, so perhaps we can take this this direction for the discussion. Is there any first thoughts or idea into the first question, perhaps, that you guys would like to add around the key benefits and argument for those value drivers? So equity, fear, contagion, scientific spillovers, and value of knowing. I think you're muted, Hannah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, I
Moving
didn't want to put you on the spot.
No, I'm just looking at the socioeconomic status and gaining access to certain treatments. So, I mean, obviously it's again linked to treatments, but definitely equity is a massive driver, as you know, with the lower socioeconomic, you know, the time for diagnosis and accessing the treatment, and they usually maybe have more comorbidities. So for them, there is obviously a higher social need or maybe benefit for equitable access for diagnostics.
Indeed. Is there any, when we think about equity, is there any other dimension or key benefit that you can think about beyond the socioeconomic status that maybe we could capture? I see something came through for those scientific spillovers.
Yeah, I added something there.
Do you wanna talk it through, Ralph?
Yeah, sure. So, and this is a specific use case would be in comprehensive genomic profiling, which we know is not necessary for all cancers, and that's sort of the opinion of clinicians and payers alike. But the scientific spillover there is that if we uniformly capture a comprehensive view of every tumor, even early, it gives us insights into what other biomarkers might be implicated or might be interesting to pursue as potential targets in the future. And so the more uniformly we do that, the more significant the data sets are, the easier it gets to advance the science. By limiting the access to testing in those, it makes it harder to identify those biomarkers without going to extreme measures.
I'm on board. I mean, this is Brian. You know, I think just tacking on to that, with the explosion in the use of AI and ML, there is an opportunity here to value just the act of data collection and being able to look, you know, years in the future and be able to quantify the, and I'm always about quantification, but quantify the benefits of capturing that data to mine and to be able to use it in a fundamental way to improve outcomes in the not too distant future. We continually apply these technologies, these techniques to learn, and the more data that we collect, the more we can employ it in order to find these unique relationships within the data that can help us, you know, answer some of these tough questions that we don't even know are on the horizon yet.
So I see that Ralph and Brian align with each other. Is there any other reaction that anyone has on this, or do we feel like we are?
It's important to note that I was talking about genomic testing, and I think Brian was talking about AI and machine learning, which can be used even before genomic testing can be done. So, I mean, they would tend to inform one another. I think that and in some cases they could be replacements for each other. Well, AI could certainly be a low cost replacement.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. That's a long way off, but
I see that also Carmen left a comment here. I wonder, Carmen, if you want to share some of your insights and whether they somehow align with the points that Ralph was making. I think you added that new technologies contribute to generate evidence for future PM indications.
So yeah, perhaps my thinking was that not only in one biomarker in one specific therapeutic area, perhaps is more around to the technology, how it could contribute, of course, to access to the testing or to identify patients and diagnose patients, but also, you know, one of the narratives could be, you know, that the technology contribute beyond on that. And it's not only for oncology, it could be useful for other different pathologies, approaches, prevention. So the value to invest in the technology is more than only precision medicine. So I think that was my thought and my idea.
Thank you, Carmen. I see there are some insights into the value of knowing dimension. So I think, so if you can click on that comment, Yonut, the society the other one. So we also had this comment from Carmen about society can be aware about the management of these diseases and potentially how to prevent in their family, friends, and so on. I think it's pretty straightforward, but I wonder if there is any addition you'd like to make, Carmen.
Yes, indeed. I think that this is mainly about genetic testing, and that could contribute, again, to precision medicine, identify patients, but also there are some different biomarkers that have family implications. So it's not only for patients and treatment decision, it's also, you know, how it could contribute to the prevention in the family around that. So yeah, it was about this point.
So almost a spillover effect in and of itself. Yeah. Well, when I think about the value of knowing, I tie it in this context very closely to reduction in unnecessary treatment, particularly those that are burdensome in any way, shape, or form to the patient, to the caregiver, to society. But you know, I think this intrinsic value of having insight into what's going on within your body is a little bit more difficult to disentangle. But you know, when you think of the value of knowing, the value of knowing which treatments to direct towards a particular patient. You know, I think it's sort of an indirect chain of concepts there. It's the, you know, the value, you know, the test leading to the value of knowing which treatment to target, leading to the reduction in uncertainty, which is sort of the flip side of value knowing, but the reduction in uncertainty, which will allow you to avert any unnecessary treatments. And then you have the clinical, you know, the humanistic and the economic and societal consequences due to that indirect chain of concepts, if you will.
I'm aligned with that.
Thank you, Brian.
There's a piece about this, and it may have been captured. I think it was in Carmen's comments, but you know, the right kind of recommendations for genetic testing, and this would be in the presence of cancer. Even if there's no reason to believe that there's a genetic component, I think the capture of the data tends to provide surprises to people, whether it's for BRCA or Lynch syndrome, that I think doesn't just provide information for the patient themselves about what types of screening they should be doing outside of what their primary diagnosis may be, but also for family as well, because anything that's hereditary poses risk for, you know, for all of those with the variants. So I think there's a component of that leads to the value of knowing.
Thank you, Ralph.
And in today's day and age, it leads to access already to advanced screening, or different screening for those who are afflicted with those variants.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I wonder, I don't know if there is anything to add here, but maybe we should move to the second question just for the time that we still have available. In this orange box, here we are tasked to add some insight around what evidence is needed to support this specific value driver. I see that there were already some insights that were included here in the meantime, and I wonder if I see Hannah has added one around preventative health with prognostic biomarkers can support patient management. Do you want to add any thoughts on this?
Sorry, I hadn't written it to the end, but yeah, basically I'm thinking more around the preventive health. So the major cost of the healthcare budget goes to hospital visits and, you know, when it's really needed, but there should be maybe a little bit more focus on the preventive health, which you can do with prognostic biomarkers and can support really the patient management, you know, possibly reduce unnecessary hospital visits, which would then have economic and healthcare resource utilization impact. Just maybe even two different, to be honest. So preventive health and, you know, how prognostic biomarkers can be used. Now thinking out loud.
Any reaction or additional thought?
Aligned.
Let's see what's coming through. We have a few additional ones in scientific spillover. I don't know who has added it, but I wonder if there is any comment.
When I think of scientific spillovers, and I know it's not the perfect tie to this context, I always think of something like rituximab, sort of one of the first, or if not the first, oncology monoclonal antibody. And The scientific insights, what was learned along the way, paved the way for a new era of treatment approach to oncologic conditions. And you know, I've been thinking for quite some time about how to quantify that. It's sort of how to quantify the counterfactual there. What would have happened or what could have happened had rituximab not come to fruition. But that, I mean, that's the kind of I think that's the kind of perspective that in HTA health economists like to see, and I haven't quite sort of made the tie over into the genetic testing sphere, but I know there's got to be one there. And I think, you know, from an HTA point of view, they're going to want to see, to the extent possible, a way to quantify the impact. Why should we infuse this into our value calculus, if you will? And it can't necessarily be qualitative in nature. You've got to be able to show a tangible benefit that society has gained, whether it is economic in nature or clinical in nature, or even a quality of life component. That's what I think is going to push the needle. And that's where I think investment needs to be made by a variety of different stakeholder groups who have an interest in pushing the needle for you know, these value drivers, non-traditional value drivers, to be fundamentally and systematically incorporated into a value assessment or a health technology assessment process.
Thank you, Brian. I wonder, I know we have a little bit of time left, and then we'll have to go back to the main room. So I wonder if there is any additional thought to add, either to what Brian just shared or insights you have added into the orange box, because it would be nice to maybe take a little bit time for at least for the yellow box, before we go back to the main room.
Yeah, I'll just make just one more call out to the definition of actionability. I think there is a disconnect, and I think this happens at the provider level, this happens at the payer level, this happens everywhere, as to what constitutes actionability. And so as it relates to scientific spillovers, there's a lot of markers that go unused or underutilized. And if you've ever attended a virtual tumor board, you see how the combination of biomarkers actually can get used in the real world, and I don't think that's quantified in any way as it comes to coverage decisions, especially outside the U.S. So that's what my long sort of set of list of questions is in the scientific spillovers piece.
Thank you, Ralph. Any comments specifically on this? I know this is something that came up also during the plenary. Otherwise, I think we can leave it as such, and I think we can, if you have a few additional ideas on the yellow box, perhaps you can capture them in the meantime. And this is about example of evidence that you or others have collected. So perhaps you can add some of your thoughts. And I know we have a few more minutes. We have to go back at 25 past. So we have 4 minutes, and I just wanted to put there that we will have to do a very quick reporting back to the main plenary. And what we were asked to share is just a few insights on, you know, let's say not just to report on the full discussion and insights that were shared, but really more about what were the aha moments or key learnings from the discussion we just had. So I wonder if we could have any volunteer here that wants to share just like a few quick highlights from this discussion. I don't know if Brian, Ralph, Carmen, Hannah, any of you who would like to, Melanie, of course, or Patil, to share a few quick sentences from key learnings. Otherwise, I will have to be the bad cop and volunteer someone. I see, Brian, you were making some movements. I don't know if you would be
I want
comfortable.
to, I want to, but unfortunately, I have to step out for a team call and by 11:30, so I need to prep for that. But I'm itching to, My apologies.
That's okay. Thank you, anyways. Ralph, would you mind to share some insights?
Sure. So when we get back, you want me to review sort of what we discussed
Just
here?
very high level. I don't think we need to report on everything, but maybe if we want to bring one or two comments from this discussion, I think that would be great. And I think there was some elements around indeed this element about scientific spillover, actionability, and the learnings that we have shared before, and also in terms of I heard several insights around the genetic testing and what that could be somewhat of a spillover also for the family. And so there were a few insights, but I can leave you to share a few, if you don't mind.
No problem.
And I see more things coming through also in the green box, which is great. So I see, for example, the green box was about how to somehow inform advocacy efforts to indeed move towards value-based care. And I see that there are some comments around having integrated communication plan according to the target audience and market archetype, which is something that we've heard several times. So how do you really bring the right type of evidence and also adapt it to the type of stakeholders that you have in front of you or decision maker? And I also see a comment around Congress and meetings events where HTA members participate to present examples and evidence. And I guess this is also connected to what Lideva in plenary was sharing before around, starting this type of dialogue with HTA bodies and really understand their point of view, and at the same time try to share insights into this different way of looking at value-based care. And I see them more coming in. So I know that we will go back in a second, but this map will stay open. I think they'll share it in a second also there. So please feel free, if you get any ideas, later today, tomorrow, you're always welcome to keep adding insights, because they will all feed into our next steps and discussion. So thanks so much. I know it was a first brief discussion here, but I'm sure that we will have many other opportunities to go a little bit deeper into this. So thank you so much for the insights you shared.
So as you can see, we have 4 quadrants on the map, and we will be discussing these 4 questions. We don't need to follow a strict methodology here, so whatever comes to mind can be discussed. We'll hopefully look at what key benefit and arguments you see for the various value drivers under economic and productivity impact. You already see some examples that we have collected from literature and other conversations that I hear. Then we'll also hope to understand how the evidence that is needed can be collected, what good practices exist or current practices exist in HTA decision making of considering innovative value drivers with which evidence, and then ultimately how all this information can be put together in order to inform advocacy efforts and understand better how advocates can make a difference on the system level and convince the decision makers of broadening their view on what value means when we speak about innovative health technologies. So I know that that Lou, you have a strong passion around the insurance value. So why don't you give us some thought around that value driver?
Well, I mean, again, I put the insurance value into two groups. One is financial risk protection, which, you know, it's been used mostly in the developing country context to sort of see by Dean Jameson and Stefan Ferge of Harvard to try to figure out, you know, how much the families are at risk of losing everything. That's extremely important, obviously. And if you have universal health coverage, like you do in the United Kingdom, then you don't have to worry about the financial risk protection, right? We have it in the United States because we have uninsured, so it's a big. But that's one kind of insurance value. But I think from in terms of valuing a new product or diagnostic, I'm thinking of what I call health risk protection, which is the peace of mind you get from knowing something can be done about your problem or a problem that you might have eventually. So everybody's getting, you know, before the you know, we've been working on obesity for 40 years. Finally, the GLP-1s are having some effect. So even though I haven't started taking one yet, I feel like, oh, now I have an option to do something about, you know, weight that I didn't have when I was working on Zenical for Roche. Okay. So everybody's better. But I think the same thing applies to global climate change and global warming. We're all worse off because we're uncertain about whether we'll have anything that's going to be effective with that problem. So if someone comes with a new technology tomorrow, it's extremely valuable and we're all better off, and we're willing to pay a lot for people doing the science around dealing with climate change. So that's the thing that I think is really valuable. And I think, and it's not just, in a sense, it's not short-term patient-centered. So patient-centered always sounds like, oh, the existing group of patients, but we're all going to be a patient at some point, and we benefit from knowing something can be done in case I ever develop lung cancer, right? For example. So I think that what that ends up doing mathematically, and I think it comes out of the GRACE framework, it means that I'm willing to pay more and to have a higher threshold for those things, those problems. And I think, and we want to reward those innovation in those areas where we have tremendous uncertainty, and we're willing to pay a lot for it. So that's how I see health risk protection affecting the threshold. And so I see the work that is coming out of the GRACE framework as important work for that, is what I would say. And I think it's being done. So I would say, look at the work that this company Entity Risk has done with the GRACE framework, and then try to get to the threshold. Now, okay, so but then that comes back to the other question I raised in the special interest group at ISPOR, is global differential pricing. I would say different people. I want the rich people in China and India to contribute to drug development, not the poor people. Okay. So, but I want, so I think we want to get a global differential pricing as another aspect to everybody contributing to innovation. I'm not sure where that goes in here. I do want to mention one other thing, Vincent. We put adherence in the value flower, but oftentimes when I do a new version, I often put something called family spillovers, which came out of and that's not in the current. So I would just put a question mark there, like family spillovers question mark, maybe under adherence. Do we want to? And what that is it's like we're all worse off if a loved one gets Alzheimer's disease. I mean, we're unhappy because a loved one has Alzheimer's, or we have a child with a rare Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. There's an impact on the family, and that's not in that value flower the way we did it. And it wasn't that we considered it and rejected it. I'm just saying it was a group process, and it wasn't totally comprehensive. So I think what are called family spillovers is over there is important to bring that in. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Thanks. That was really rich. You mentioned the patient perspective, patient centricity a few times. Maybe there is a patient representative here that wants to chime in on this.
Gee, I don't feel called out at all, Vincent. Hey, technical question. Should we be adding things to this these
Yes,
lists
please.
ourselves?
Yes,
Or you,
please.
okay, I didn't know if you all were doing that, or if we were supposed to be typing in.
I will Maria and I, we will capture also what is being said as good as we can, but please feel free to add in your thoughts on the group map directly.
I mean, I would just say that the problem I always had with adherence, even though it was an intermediate outcome in a way. Adherence per se creates, if you're more adherent, you get more value. So I guess the question is, does it directly give? No, it indirectly gives me value. It leads me to get more out. If I'm adherent, then I get more benefit of a product or whatever. So it's a bit of an indirect effect or intermediate effect is what I would say. But on the other hand, you could say, well, if someone can invent a new medicine, like you could say, well, a once a day is better than a twice a day because I'll get more adherence, and therefore to create more value. So I should pay. What people would say, oh, we shouldn't pay more for convenience. They call that convenience. Well, I don't know that that's convenient. That's not, it's tricky. It's not exactly convenience. It actually leads to better adherence and leads to more value. So I should be willing to pay more for a once a day version than a twice a day because I know I'll get more value. So I think we got to be careful. You might put in there relationship with convenience or something, or value, the value of convenience or something is part of it.
Yeah, and I think, and these are comments that are meant to be placed in the context of how to wrestle with personalized medicine in the context of value assessments at multiple levels, right? So if we're thinking about, and there's some tension inherently, because I think if you think about different levels at which these types of assessments are applied, as you've noted, Lou, there's a population level for HTAs like ICER and others. There's the patient level, like what ASCO and NCCN tried to do. I would argue pathways as well. Some version of this, that there's a disconnect, right, where you're trying to, I would argue at the patient level, there's some consistency of that the definition of value is really more about getting the right care to the right patient at the right time. So it's very individualized. And there's a cost effectiveness argument inherent in that personalized medicine or genetic testing or anything that helps you identify what is the right treatment and the right therapy for the right patient at the right time has a cost effectiveness argument to it inherently that is hard to capture. And I don't know where it is placed in sort of the value frameworks, but I've heard this explicitly from payers where they haven't, at NCCN panels, sort of behind closed doors, where they've determined that there's a significant cost to giving the wrong therapy to the wrong patient at the right time. If they all cost $80,000, and if I spend 6 months or 12 months, and this is not true in every disease therapeutic area, but in certain disease areas, there's a significant cost associated with giving a patient the wrong therapy, even if it's considered valuable by a certain framework, or if it's the 80% option in the pathway. That now I've spent as a payer, I've spent $80,000 on a treatment that doesn't do anything, but it seemed to be the right choice based on some other analysis. So now we're 6-8 months in, and the patient has progressed. There are fewer options, so now I have to apply another $80,000. Now I don't have as many options. If I'd given the right $80,000 treatment that may have been a different option, then actually the patient benefits, the payer benefits, because the patient doesn't progress. I don't have to do more. Once a patient progresses or you're moving into a second line of therapy, there's a whole nother association of appointments and diagnostics associated with that, let alone side effects. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about when you're talking about insurance value. To me, it's kind of an opportunity cost factor, but I don't know how that, I can see how that gets applied at a patient level. I'm not sure how well that type of cost and effectiveness of giving, so I guess in a broader sense, there's this tension, and I don't know how to capture it at a population health level. There is certainly, it's problematic to you want to eliminate inappropriate variation in care, right? So standardizing treatment appropriately, but also what we seem to lack is some ability to quantify and incorporate the idea of what's the value of delivering appropriate variation in care. And I can see how you can adjudicate that more at a patient level. I'm not sure how you incorporate that at a population level. is that what we're talking about when we're talking about insurance value, or sort of the idea of opportunity cost at the plan level?
I think it's really what probably know Mark Fendrick at VBID, the value-based insurance design. And they would just say that is low. They would say that's low value care. And you say, not only is it low value, it's actually very low value. It's actually negative. Okay. So I think they would just say our pathways shouldn't let us go down that path. We shouldn't be doing that. It's a mistake in the system. It's a system design mistake. So it is a cost to not having a good pathway, is what I would say. So yeah, you would want to say that pathway is not working because we make a lot of mistakes. We give it to people, it's expensive, and they don't get much benefit. So I think that's not part of insurance. I mean, it's part of a broad question about trying to avoid low value care or negative value care. I don't know if that helps, Alan, but that's how
it does. I'm just not sure where that plays, because I think that sort of sits at the crux of the value proposition of personalized medicine, is really getting to that idea of maximizing the opportunity or the ability to
I mean, to me, any problem you have, you have like false positives, and they generate costs that you wish you hadn't spent money on. So you have, when you analyze that decision, you have to say, well, what's the probability of a false positive that leads me to give care to people that's not going to be productive? So it's part of the rule, analyzing the decision rule and then doing the cost effectiveness of the rule. And then say, well, if I can't really stop that, then that's a problem with the rule,
Yep. I will say on this productivity question, then I'll let others chime in. I think anything that, and productivity means different things to different patients, but I think from an economics perspective, it really gets to work, right? And the ability to generate income. And of course, with work also comes benefits, right? Like time off. And at least in the US, work for most people, or at least 60% or so of the population, is tied to your insurance access, right? So there's a lot tied up in productivity, not just the ability to go to work, but the ability to maintain, at least in some countries, there's a relationship between work and coverage, the ability to pay for the out-of-pocket costs associated with care, the ability to maintain your insurance access. And so any treatment that allows you to be at work more, to be more productive at work, is going to have a benefit, not to everybody, but to a workforce population that needs to be captured at not just the population level, but at the patient level as well.
Thank you for that, Alan. I see that there's also some comments around like actual examples of how that productivity is being measured. ICER is incorporating productivity impact, and in Croatia, there's also data sets that are being considered. So perhaps CAT-OR or Ivica, you would want to say a few words to how that is being done, or how successful it is.
Sure, yeah, I can chime in here. And I tried to add a description. I don't know if I did that right, but there's a little bit additional context there if you click into the title there. I'm not on the economics team, so this is the most recent example I can remember from our 2023 report of a gene therapy for sickle cell disease. And this was just a unique population where we had evidence and had data on productivity for both the patient and caregiver. And so we were able to kind of calculate annual patient loss productivity as well as kind of unpaid work for caregivers, both of which just happened to lost productivity or unpaid work wages. And so we actually had a code-based case analysis. Sorry, I'm getting a note that my internet connection is unstable.
You cut off for like a second, so I think it didn't necessarily.
Okay. Apologies. Yeah, so we were able to incorporate both of those aspects into a code-based case analysis that both had the healthcare system as well as the societal perspective. And so there was kind of a small change. It kind of increased our value for those drugs when we looked at those productivity impacts. And so that's just one recent example. I'm sure there are others. I'm not more in the weeds on every single report that ICER is doing, but I know that previously the patient communities have also been helpful in either pointing us to those sources in case there are kind of evidence in that area, or for our team to kind of find that within our own literature search and be able to incorporate that. But I think a lot of times we don't have the right kind of data on that population to be able to bring into the analysis, unfortunately.
And when you do those types of analyses, do you balance out the cost, the societal cost? So, you know, you're losing money because you're less productive because you're not working, but then someone's got to pay for something. So, you know, you're claiming social security benefits, or in England, we call it the dole. So do you balance that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure how that actually gets incorporated into the model. I know that broadly that is something that ICER is talking about and concerned about, of there are not just benefits associated with a lot of these value drivers, but there are also costs. And so if we're looking at the societal perspective, are we just adding the things that are benefiting, or are we also taking into consideration all the things that are costing society as well? And so this is part of our exploration in terms of the economic model of how we can continue to supplement the societal perspective while also being wary of the ways in which that calculation may be devaluing patients. And I think when we're thinking about productivity, it's especially important if, you know, we include that, but then if we're talking about a population of people that are retired or that can't work due to a disability, are we sending wrong signals there and incorporating in a way that we don't yet know what the implications are? And so I know that we are exploring that internally right now.
That's a fascinating consideration also in connection to what Ivica had shared, that also the costs or the productivity losses for informal carers can be integrated. And Ivica, I don't know if it was you that just tried to speak up. No. Okay. Well, I cut someone else off, but Andrea,
No,
I know
I could just say quickly that Andrea, no, people aren't taking that into account. But I will say in the vaccines area, Mark Connolly does work on what he calls fiscal modeling. So you actually take the government. You can say, well, what happens from the government's perspective when they have to pay these benefits? Now, in the U.S., because we have employer-based insurance, you know, the employer might say, well, you know, my employees are going to miss work because of migraine. So I really want a good migraine drug in my benefit package. And implicitly, I'm willing to pay more for a good migraine drug because it's going to give people are going to stay at work. And so that's how it would play out in the U.S. healthcare system, that the company would want it in the package. And so the industry could say, well, I'm going to set a higher price, other things equal, because, you know, I know the employer is going to value it. But ICER, you know, when you go to the societal perspective, it's a different, and I will say, you know, ICER is making progress here, but none of us in our field can tell ICER. I mean, you know, if they said to me, well, Lou, how much should we raise the threshold for those benefits? I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly the threshold from a societal perspective is not the same as the threshold from a health sector perspective. And ICER doesn't really change their threshold for the societal perspective. They're still using 100 to 150, you know. So there's a lot to be worked out in some of that, but I think we all, you know, those fiscal effects are important too.
We often talk from the perspective of the decision makers at the end and what is important to them, but the submitting party is also quite an important actor in this whole process. So I don't know, Andrea, if you have from an industry perspective some additional thoughts on any of these value drivers and how we can use them, prop them up to improve access.
I mean, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about the value of knowing and the value of reduced productivity and societal impact in the context of retina. So we have a gene therapy for retinitis pigmentosa that obviously it's a gene therapy. It doesn't cure, it just stops the disease in its tracks. So we're looking for value arguments for testing to be done earlier. And the pushback is, well, there's no treatment, so why should we test earlier? And it's not going to change the treatment decision or the way the patient is managed, But the value to the patient is a massive, just knowing what the genetic drivers are of their disease, even from a prognostic value. So are they going to go blind in 5 years or 15 years? Because depending on one of the over 80 genetic alterations that drives retinitis pigmentosa, you could actually, you know, be able to plan differently depending on what you know. Also, the caregiver burden is going to increase as time goes on, the familial effect in that you need to get your children tested, your nieces and nephews, siblings, whatever. You know, there's lots of I'm trying to think outside the box in a lot of these ways. And how can I demonstrate the value to the payer of covering the testing, even though it's not going to necessarily change the management of the patient, and to the physician for the same reason. But I think demonstrating the value to the patient is actually an easier lift. But to be able to demonstrate these, you know, elements of value and putting money, like costs around those, it's proving quite tricky.
Indeed,
So if anybody has any advice.
I will say when I sit, a lot of payers I sit with on US ad boards, they basically say, I don't care about qualities. I only care about total cost of care.
Yeah.
I think so how do you get them to get off of the only costs, you know? And you do that by working with the doctor. You know, we have a number of, you work with the clinicians want it because the patients want it. So we have countervailing forces here. It's not there's not, you know, the payers don't decide everything. We also have physicians, we have patients, and we're all in this very complex interactive game. And, you know, and so I think that's it. You put you convince the clinicians that it's valuable, and you convince the patients it's valuable. And then the payers will say, well, if I can raise my premiums and everybody else raises their premiums, then, you know, I'll do it. Okay. As long as I'm not the loser here, because I'm worried about my profits, right, in the US. So I think it's the interaction of those stakeholder groups lead to more spending and more innovation.
And I mean, you're also talking about hugely expensive treatments too. However, in this case, at least it's once and that's it. It's not a lifetime's worth of expensive treatment, which I'm tackling in other products that I'm working on.
Okay. The other thing I would raise from a patient perspective around this issue of work-related, you know, economics consequences is, and it's implied here, but there's a lot of focus on, you know, loss of productivity, absenteeism, presenteeism, which has value to the employer, that it obviously has value to the employee because those things are attached, or at least often attached to wages or loss of wages. But remember, anytime an employee is not, or a caregiver for medical reasons is not at work, there's a double whammy. They're using up things that have value, like paid sick leave, time off. If they're hourly employees, they're losing that income, but at the same time they're losing those. There's an economic value to the things that they're losing. They're also usually spending money when they're not at work.
Yeah.
So going to the appointment, the cost associated with any out of pocket, not just in the benefit design, but anything related. Patients spend a lot of money associated with being out of work, both in the benefit design if there's out of pocket in the benefit design, but lots of out of pocket associated with parking, you know, paying for nutrition, all the costs that come with going into the healthcare system, being at home, where you're paying money out of pocket when you're not at work. You're losing money out of your pocket at the same time when you're not at work. So, and these are real dollars that can be incorporated and captured in cost effectiveness analysis, rather than trying to attribute or come up with some surrogate for dollars that you then compare to real cost associated with the cost of a therapy.
Yeah, I think the challenge there, Alan, though, is a lot of that is on a patient by patient basis.
That's
So
what
how do you find
gets back to that tension of how do you do this at a population? It's a lot easier in my mind to kind of think about these at a patient level. It's harder to capture that and quantify it up into a population level analysis. I think if you captured some of this, if you had better representation of the broader population in the clinical trial population, this is an opportunity where you could capture a lot of these data that are outside the clinical benefit. I said, these are data not for the FDA, but for the HTA, where you really can in the clinic, which is where a lot of HTAs use the data for the analysis. If we could capture more of this information about the, sort of full cost of accounting, if you will, of the therapy for the patient, that would be a way to capture the data in that setting in a more rigorous way that you could incorporate it, I think, into cost-effective analysis at a population level.
I've just read another of Lou's papers, and actually the use of those data sets from clinical trials is another challenge, as it doesn't reflect the real world application of the treatments in the end. But in the interest of time, because we will have to go back to the main room, I wanted to ask you or wanted to hear from you what you think is a surprising insight that you've heard now, or something that we should highlight to the wider group in terms of economic and productivity impacts. Just a surprising comment or aspect. It's all self-evident, I see. So perhaps what I really liked was the idea of really collaborating with the various stakeholder groups, convincing or utilizing the perspectives of the patients, of the clinicians, and the economists all together, and industry, and combine forces to enact change. And at the same time, I think there is so much rich content here that it would be pointless to try and summarize in just a few words. So perhaps we can just keep it with that, and not bore the rest of the group with too many details.
Thank you, Vincent. You'll have to say what's surprising for us. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Well, I suggest we just wrap up with some quick takeaways from each group. So curious to see how your discussion went. I suggest, as Vincent was in group 2 and I was in group 3 and I was in group 1, I suggest we start with group 2 if that's possible. So I don't know, Sylvia, who from your group I can give the floor, and just like one insight, it doesn't have to be much, just one sentence is sufficient.
Okay, so that's me. And there was general alignment across the needs across this group 2, which is for sort of public health initiatives. We had a lot of discussion about scientific spillovers and the value of knowing, and how it relates to panel testing like NGS or comprehensive genome profiling, but also to AI and machine learning, and how that creates options for the future, for patient options, but also industry options, where there's a significant public good associated with it. So that was where we were aligned. Good discussions about evidence generation, and I think about how we package it. There was some really good feedback. So all in all, I think there was some strong alignment, and there was certainly no disagreements. So that's good.
Thank you, Ralph, for sharing, and for everyone else to contribute to this as well. I don't know, Vincent, if you're back and your group wants to go first, next, or
Yeah, sure. I will keep it short as well. Thank you for jumping in, as my technicalities kept me from being heard and hearing, or just one of the two. But in our group, we talked about the economic and productivity impact, and there was a lot of insights shared around productivity, insurance value, and the adherence improving factors, and reduction in unnecessary treatments, and how we can combine all these value drivers beyond this 3 in our group as well, to really make the case for the right treatment at the right time for the right patient. We've also heard of some quite interesting case studies that are utilizing the value drivers mentioned, and with different data sets. And another thing that was really powerful, I believe, was that basically a call to action to really combine forces and work together across stakeholder groups, including industry, clinicians, patients, and economists, and so forth, to make the value case to the decision makers and convince them of the necessity to expand their perspectives on value and enhance decision making like that.
Thank you, Vincent. I look forward to seeing the notes with examples that will also be all shared with you afterwards. Just one or two highlights from my group. I think what was very interesting is that we really talked about the need of a movement or collaborative approach to really bring this to decision makers, but also the challenge if we talk about holistic value stories in the data variation that exists. Because of the personalized character, we have like different biomarkers, different treatment paths, different experiences, and that makes it very difficult to bring that all together. And there was a general agreement on incorporating or looking at the social determinants of health, taking that as an angle and fuse that with health equity for the collection of data and including different geographic locations. So I don't know if I've missed anything specific for my group, but the groups map will remain open if you want to delve into it further. And then Vincent, I will leave it with you for sharing the next steps and for close our workshop.
Absolutely. I'll just I know we're over time and everyone is busy, so just quickly to share the next steps with you. On the one hand, we really want to make use of the insights you have shared and the discussions we've had today. We want to develop the value stories further together with the right evidence, and we want to use the various recommendations for how to package all this information for enhancing advocacy roadmaps that we're creating in the Access and Advocacy project. And then just as a little pre-announcement is we will have a second workshop with this workshop series. The date is tentative, aiming for October, where we will look into enabling peer-to-peer support between global and local organizations for advocacy campaigns and supporting industry and patient group collaboration for improved HTA submissions. So I hope you'll be interested in those topics as well. And yeah, I'm really happy to have had you here and look forward to staying in touch. And thank you very much.